Right now, we are going through a sermon series on Joesph, 11th son of Jacob. We find his story throughout kind of like the middle part of Genesis. And so as Derek and I sat down to talk about what this sermon series is about, what he wanted me to talk about, one of the things that he said is we were looking at how Joesph has grown in character traits. And I was given the trait of faithfulness. So we'll see how that goes. As we begin to get into this, I need you to keep three things in mind as I go through what I'm talking about today. First thing I want you to think about, to keep in mind, to remember as we talk, is I want you to just think about stories. I want you to remember some of your favorite movies, some of your favorite books, maybe even some of your favorite plays. Think about Frodo and Sam, Aragorn, the friendship between Legolas and Gimli, and how across 3 movies and 3 books we see them grow. They're faced with trial after trial, and as they are faced with these trials, they either succeed or they fail, and they continue on from that. Think of Anakin or Luke in the Star Wars movies and how they grow and how they succeed and how they fail and how they face challenge after challenge, and they stand up again and they try and they try and they try again. A while ago I read A Tale of Two Cities, and I can't remember what the character's name is off the top of my head, but how he comes through this story and strives to save someone who's losing his life for no reason other than he left for a new life, trading places with him and taking on the death that somebody else deserved so that he can have a life with his wife and father in a new land. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind, is just the concept of story. The second thing I want you to keep in mind is as Jesus talks and teaches the parable of the talents, where there's a master who's leaving to a distant land, and he goes to 3 of his servants and says, "You I give $100,000, take care of this well while I am gone." To another he says, "Here's $50,000, take care of this well while I am gone." And to the last he says, "Here's $10,000, take care of this well while I'm gone." And he leaves for an extended period of time, and he comes back, and his servants come and say, "Look, you gave me $100,000, and I've turned it into $1 million. And the person who he gave $50,000 came back and said, "Look, I turned this into $500,000. And the person he gave $10,000 to comes back and says, "I buried it in the backyard so no one can find it. Here you go." These people were given something to take care of, and the master expected them to take care of it well. Some did, and one did not. And then finally, the last thing I want you to keep in mind is a prayer from Pierre. I did not take French. I took German in high school, and that was many, many years ago. So if I butcher this and you go like, that's wrong, I apologize. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. But this is a prayer that he wrote that with my organization, we come together once a month for just a prayer call, and someone walks us through some prayer or prayer practice, and this is one that we've done numerous times. And this is what he says: "Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet, it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances, acting on your own goodwill, will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit, gradually forming within you, will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you. And accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Keep these things in mind as we move through the story of Joesph today. So throughout the narrative of Joesph, we see God continually asking Joesph this single question: can I trust you with this? We see a story of God entrusting Joesph with alternating gifts, asking each and every time, can I trust you with this? And as we look at what God entrusts Joesph with, we will see two primary things. The first of which is what God is preparing him for. And the second of which, when he stewards these things well, when he takes care of these things well, we see what God is about. Now, all of this cannot be seen in a snapshot. We can't look at a single passage and say, look at this passage and we see all of this stuff. Instead, we have to look at the entire story of Joesph from beginning to end to see his character grow. I'm a nerd. I love books. I love movies. I would say that I play D&D, but that's not actually true. I run D&D. But I give my players a chance to take their characters and say, this is who you were. Let's tell a story of how you grow. Let's tell a story of how you change. Let's tell a story of how you evolve as a character and as a person. And so as I looked at this story, I saw a 3-act play, a 3-act story unfolding across the pages. And as in all good character-driven stories, we see growth in our main character through trial after trial. And in each trial, in each time of growth, we see God asking the question to Joesph, can I trust you with this? So with all that said, quick disclaimer, we are not going to look at any specific passage today. So I didn't put a PowerPoint together. There it is. That's what you got. Because to read passage after passage after passage to tell the entire story of Joesph, we will be here until 3 o'clock, and my grandmother-in-law said that the preacher today has to keep it short. So Act 1, as in any good movie, the opening credits go, and we see this title, Joesph, Growing in Faith. And it begins with this boy, this young man, waking up after having a couple of dreams. And he comes to his father and his brothers as they're sitting around the table eating, and he says, hey guys, guess what? I had this dream. Oh, tell us this dream, Joesph. And he said, my brothers and I, we were out in the field, and we were gathering hay, we were gathering straw, we were gathering a harvest. And as we stacked them up, mine stood up, and everyone else's bowed down to me. And then I had this other dream where the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. And he looks at his brothers who have tormented him and been mean to him as the youngest of 3 children. I know what this is like. He's the youngest of 11 at the time. 12-ish? I don't know. But he looks at his brothers who have tormented him and been mean to him his entire life, and he goes, "You are going to bow down to me." And his father pipes up and goes, "Really? You are the 11th child. You are the lowest on the totem pole right now. This is not going to take place." Joseph is his dad's favorite. But even though he's his favorite, he is still 11th in line. He has 11 other brothers in front of him, or 10 other brothers in front of him, and one under him. But he has this character trait of pride. He has this understanding of himself that he is better than his brothers. And he tells this dream, and he shows his pride, and he says, "I'm greater than you." Now, actions have consequences. The consequence of this action is his brothers finally get fed up with him and throw him in a pit. And then decide, let's sell him off. Let's make some money off of him. And they sell him to some distant cousins, and he is taken off as a slave, and they fake his death to his father. God has given Joseph a dream and asked him, "Can I trust you with this?" But because of the pride of Joseph and his rubbing it in his brothers' faces, he gave a resounding no. You cannot trust me with this. As Joseph is being carted off into a distant land, we fade back in time to look and see, how did we end up here? How did we end up with the 11th of 12 sons being the most prideful of them all? He should know his place. And so we go back and we look at the story of his father, Jacob. Jacob, or Jacob in Hebrew, means the trickster, the supplanter. We may better understand it as the cheater. Someone who cheats to get his way. The youngest of a pair of twins, again, youngest son. He has no place. He has no standing. His brother is of more import than him. But as his brother is born, he comes out and he is grabbing onto his brother's heel, trying to trip him up, trying to trick him, trying to get an edge over his brother, living up to his name already. And then as time goes on, he tricks his brother out of his inheritance. He tricks his blind father into giving him a blessing. And then he runs away because he's afraid that his brother, rightfully so, is going to kill him. And so as he is running away, he ends up in the land with a distant cousin of his mother's, finds a woman that he loves, and then the tables turn, and he is tricked. He is cheated out of his bride. And so then he works longer and ends up getting the wife that he wanted, and then tricks his father out of his livelihood. And so Jacob then has two wives. They have handmaidens. Way back then, you could have multiple wives and multiple mothers and all sorts of stuff. So he ends up having multiple kids, but he has one wife that he doesn't really care for and the other wife that he adores and shows favoritism to. And her womb is shut because of the abuses that are heaped on his other wife. And her womb is opened. And then after many, many years, his favorite wife finally bears him a son, Joesph. This is why Joseph is Jacob's favorite son, because he is the firstborn of his favorite wife. And then she eventually has Benjamin and passes away. And so Jacob has these two sons from his favorite wife, and the firstborn of that favorite wife is the 11th born son in his entire family. So on the totem pole, he's very, very low. He doesn't matter. But there's still favoritism being shown there. And as we understand that aspect of the story, we understand why Joseph has this character trait of pride. Because his father continued to show him favoritism above all the other brothers. As we move back into present time, this is who we are looking at. We are looking at a man, a boy, a young man, however old he may be. I believe most scholars think he's around 17 or so. We see this guy who is now in Egypt and a slave. He has been bought. He is now property. He's no longer a person, he is property. But as he is there, his master, his owner, sees that God is with him and puts him in charge of everything in his house. And we find another instance where God is saying, I'm giving you this thing. Can't I trust you with it? Can I trust you with the management and the administration of this person's house? And Joseph says, yes, you can. And he manages the house well. But as we know in the story, Potiphar's wife begins to see that he is very pleasing to the eye, and like Eve, tries to take the fruit. And yet Joseph, thankfully, is a man of integrity and denies her advances. But there's a point in this story in Genesis 34:9 where, as the wife is pursuing Joseph, he says, no one in this house is greater than I. We still see this residual pride living in him. Yes, he can take care of this well, but there's still this lingering pride. Can I trust you with this? Yes, you can. But you still think more highly of yourself than you ought. As he maintains his integrity, he ends up in jail. And in jail, again, the prison warden sees that he is a man of integrity, a man who can manage things well, and places him in charge of the entire jail. Once again, God coming to him saying, can I trust you with this? To which he says yes. And he manages the prison well. In all of this, we begin to see our two things that I mentioned at the beginning. God is preparing Joseph for something, and we begin to see what God is about. The first thing that we see God doing is he is preparing Joseph for some sort of administration. This is the second time in a row where God said, I'm going to put you in charge of something. Can I trust you with this? Can you manage this well? In both times, Joseph says yes. He's being prepared to administer, to manage something well. But then we also begin to see what God is about. And we look at that by looking at who he is put in charge of. Joseph isn't put in charge of a Fortune 500 company. He's not being put in charge of freemen. He's been put in charge of slaves and prisoners. We begin to see that God wants us to manage well, to take care of the marginalized, the enslaved, the oppressed, and the prisoners. God then looks at Joseph after he's been managing this prison well and says, I see that I can trust you with management. Can I trust you with dreams again? The last time I gave you a dream, I entrusted you with a dream. You pridefully rubbed it in everyone's faces, and look where it got you. You've managed this well. Let's try this again. And so there are two prisoners that are talking and say, we've had these dreams and we just don't know what they mean. The former cupbearer and the former baker of Pharaoh in Egypt. And as Joseph hears this conversation taking place, he says to them, interpretation belongs to God alone. We're beginning to see this trait of humility, this trait of faithfulness, this trait of growth beginning to grow and come into fruition in Joseph. Previously, when he had dreams, look at me, he says. Look at what I'm going to do, he says. And this time around, he says, to understand this, the understanding of these dreams belongs to God and God alone. Maybe he'll use me, maybe he won't. And so then he proceeds to, with God's grace, with God's help, interpret these dreams. And with the dream of the cupbearer, he says, you will be restored to your position. But then to the dream of the baker, he says, you will be executed. And then as time goes on, 3 days pass, and the dreams and the interpretations of them come true. It's a moment where Joesph again says, you can trust me with this. You have given me this thing, God. You can trust me with this now. But then there's still just a little bit of pride. There's still just a little bit of him still in there. We're in Genesis 40:14. Joesph tells the cupbearer, because he knows that he's going to be restored to his position. He says, don't forget about me. Mention me to Pharaoh. There's still some of that pride. There's still some of that searching for something greater in Joesph there. But then, as in all good stories, some sort of tragedy strikes. There's an insurmountable obstacle that arises in front of Joesph, and he is forgotten. The screen fades to black. You hear the opening and closing of heavy metal doors. You hear the clinking of chains and of grown men whimpering. And softly in the background, you hear the rustle of clothing as someone kneels down and says, it's okay. I got you. Then on the screen, we see 2 years later. The Pharaoh awakens in the night, sweaty and terrified. The images of his dreams vividly in his mind still, and slowly beginning to fade. He calls for help. In his throne room, he shares again the dream that he had: 7 cows arising out of the Nile, fat and healthy and plump, followed by 7 more sick and skinny cows that devour the 7 healthy ones. And then he talks about 7 reeds, 7 heads of grain, 7 healthy stalks being devoured by 7 blighted ones. And nobody can tell him what this means. No one can interpret the dreams. Then after years, the cupbearer, who has stood by Pharaoh these past 2 years, remembers this kind man who interpreted a dream for him. What was his name? Who was he? Where was I? I've enjoyed my life ever since I've gotten out of prison. Where was he? It was a Hebrew in prison who interpreted my dream. Perhaps he can interpret Pharaoh's as well. And so he shares this information with Pharaoh, and Joesph is taken out of prison, washed and prepared to meet with the most powerful man on earth. And Pharaoh asked Joesph to interpret his dream. And in the 2 years of being forgotten, we see the character of Joesph grow as an evident in his response. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Once again, God is presenting an opportunity to Joesph and saying, can I trust you with this? And Joesph says, it is not up to me, it is only up to God. From this, we begin to have some questions arise. Now, I work with college students, most of whom have grown up in the church. And as I've worked with college students for 10, 11 years, as I've been in college Bible college, as I grew up in the church, there's always been like this underwriting rule that we've had, which is don't ask questions. I had a student this past year where we sat down and we're having this conversation, we're doing this Bible study as a group, and they go, and put their hand down and don't say anything. I go, what? We're a small group. I notice these things. What? I just have a question, but I can't ask it. Well, why can't you ask it? I don't know. We're just not allowed to ask questions. If we don't ask questions, then we will always live in ignorance. Ask your questions. Whenever we do Bible study, we read and I ask, what did you notice? What did you like? What didn't you like? What questions do you have? And the responses generally, as we begin this Bible study process with new freshman students who grew up in the church, they go, what do you mean, what didn't I like? Is there something in there that like you just didn't like the way that was said? Does it rub against you in a weird way where you get like, I don't like how that makes me feel? I can't do that. Yes, you can. What questions do you have? I can't ask questions about the Bible. Absolutely, you can. My boss wrote a book called Asking Better Questions of the Bible. We can ask questions of the Bible. That's okay. Because if we don't ask the questions, then we're not going to find the treasure that is there. We're not going to find what God wants us to find. It's something to engage with. It's something to wrestle with. And so we have to ask questions. And as we go through this story and as I look at what God did and how Joesph continually was presented with opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and God saying, can I trust you with this? Some questions begin to arise in my mind. The questions that come up, what character trait grew? How did it grow? And what was the outcome? The simple question, or the simple answers, faithfulness grew, yay. It grew because of this, and this happened, yay. But there's so much more depth to it than that. Time and time again, God comes to Joesph asking, can I trust you with this? And each and every time, he does better than the last. Growing in stewardship, growing in faithfulness, being faithful with what God has given him. I'm giving you this thing. Can I trust you with it? Yes, no, maybe so, I don't know. We're trying. We see his stewardship, we see his faithfulness with what God has given him grow more and more every time. In every single instance, minus the first, maybe the first, Joesph was obedient. I want to give you this thing. Can you use it? Yeah, I can use it. Just in the fact of him using interpretation, in the fact of him stewarding things well, in the fact of his management and administration, just by him using his gifts, he was obedient. I give you this thing. Okay, I'm just going to set it here and never touch it again. We are not being obedient with what God has given us. If we are using it, we are being obedient. But sometimes we've got to learn how to play with the toy that we've been given. God gave him a dream, and he shared the interpretation. He was placed in charge, and he managed it well. He was given even more dreams to interpret, and he did so faithfully. No matter the outcome, and if they were favorable or not, Joesph was obedient in his faithfulness. What was the outcome then? Joesph was placed in charge of the entirety of Egypt to steward well the resources they were going to be given over the next 7 years so that Egypt and its people could survive the 7 years of famine after that. Joesph was put in a place of power because he proved that he could be trusted in that position. In that role, he obediently and faithfully managed not just resources, but people, making sure that all were cared for, the wealthy and the poor, the healthy and the sick, the fathers and mothers and the orphans. In this, we begin to see what God is about. caring for people, caring for the marginalized, caring for the hurting. When we are faithful with what God has given us, when we grow in faithfulness, we begin to find that God is putting us in places to care for those that he cares about, because we are his hands and feet on this earth. Then the story progresses just a little bit. And those that have hurt him to the core show up looking for help. We see his brothers, the very ones who beat him and enslaved him and sold him off, come looking for help. And they don't recognize him because it's been many, many years since they have seen him. And now he no longer looks like a Hebrew, but instead looks like an Egyptian. And they come to him looking for help. And there's a whole story there in that, and how he begins to take on his father's name and tricking his brothers and doing this and doing that. But truly at the end of it all, what we see is reconciliation. A unifying a family again. I think of 2 Corinthians 5, where Paul writes that we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. We've not been given the ministry of baptism. We've not been given the ministry of giving. We've not been given the ministry of evangelism. We've been given the ministry of reconciliation. That is what we have been gifted. That is what God is about. The reconciliation between two broken parties. And that's what we see with the work of Jesus on the cross, creating a space where we can be reconciled to God. Because this is what God is about. Reconciliation between us and him. Reconciliation between us and our neighbor. Reconciliation between us and our estranged family. When we are faithful and obedient with what God has given us, we will find ourselves being brought into places where we are bringing reconciliation and we are caring for those that God cares about. As we look at the story of Joesph, this is the narrative that we see. Joesph being given chance after chance after chance, with God saying, "Can I trust you with this?" Sometimes he does well, sometimes he doesn't. Something we do with our kids often is sometimes they don't make the best choice. Sometimes they lose their temper or get upset. We give them a couple minutes to feel their emotions, because that's okay. It's healthy to feel your emotions, despite what a lot of us have grown up in. We say, okay, do you want to try that again? We give them that second chance. We see a story between God and Joesph. Again, God saying, do you want to try again? Do you want to try again? Can I trust you with this again? We're going to keep trying until we get this right, because I believe that you can. And I'm having you do this because I want you to reconcile with your family, because that is what I'm about. And I want you to take care of these people who no one else is, because that is what I'm about. I want to use you to do these things. This is the story of Joesph. We see him being obedient to God, and in that continuing to grow in faithfulness, simply saying, yes, you can trust me with this. As he continually said yes again and again, we begin to see what God is about. Caring for those enslaved, caring for those imprisoned, caring for those with no resources. We see him being about reconciliation. So my final three questions for you are this. What is God entrusting you with? What is it in your life right now that God continually brings up and says, can I trust you with this thing? Second thing is, what do you see God caring about? What is he asking you to care for? Who is he asking you to care for? What is it that God has brought into your life? Not that he just says, can I trust you with this thing, but can you take care of this for me? And the last thing is he calling you to reconcile. Is he calling you to step into those spaces where there's tension, where there's brokenness? But is he saying, I want you to bring my ministry into that space? I think of a student of mine who, him and I have met, and we're talking, and he begins to tell me, yeah, there's this guy on campus that I met, and he keeps like, oh, yeah, I'm going to come to that Bible study that you talk about all the time. And then he never does. And him and I, my student and I were working out in the gym one day, and he goes, oh, yeah, that's that guy right there who keeps saying he's going to come by and never does. I was like, you should go say hi. Oh, no, I can't do that. You should invite him out. Like, you should have lunch with him. No, I can't do that. Well, why not? He just keeps telling he's going to do this thing, and then he doesn't do it. So? What if the only chance that he gets to experience the reconciliation that God offers us is through you coming to him and saying, hey, I know you haven't been true to your word. That's okay. I still love you and care about you. What spaces in your life right now is God saying, you know that person that hurt you? You know that person that has bullied you, has been mean to you, has persecuted you? What does it look like to pray for them? What does it look like to love them? What does it look like to bless your enemies, to bless those that have hurt you? Because in doing this, we find reconciliation, and in that we find the kingdom of God.